Make sure I'm recording for our folks who can't join us. All right, there we go. Let me go back to sharing. All right, so once again, for those folks who are watching the video, we will not have an online class like we're doing after today, the 14th. So on the 21st and the 28th of July, you will get a recorded version of me giving the lecture. For this week, we are in the week of the 12th, and I believe we got 2 more weeks left. This week, we're focusing on Melva Costin's chapter 2, and we're going to talk about African spirituality. And I have a really cool document to show you all in just a second. But your assignment this week, let's click on it. You do not have a discussion. So for this week, you're going to choose a case study. And in this case study, you can either choose 2 different types. So you can choose from Christian burial or funerals or weddings. Remember, we talked about those in depth a couple weeks ago. So you're going to choose either what subject area, burials or funerals, or 2 Christian weddings. And simply what you're going to do in your case study is examine what we know so far in terms of worship in a burial and compare and contrast it for another religion. It could be any religion. It is up to you. It could be Muslim. It could be, excuse me, it could be Islam. It could be Hindu, whatever. It's up to you. And I want you to do your research and find out what is similar and what is different. So you're going to compare and contrast between what we've learned in our history and up until now about burials and funerals, and you're going to compare it to another religion. Or if you want to do something different, a Christian wedding, you're going to do the same thing and compare it with a wedding or marriage ceremony, should I say, in another religion. And you can pick that religion yourself. Okay. I simply want you to compare and contrast, clearly define what is similar and what's different for those 2 religions in that type of worship experience. It should be at least 2 pages, and it's pretty easy. And this is the key thing. If you double space it, because you know I can't read, so make sure you double space. And the easy part is 1 page can be the similarities and the other page could be the differences. And that makes it really easy for you. Okay, so that's your worship case study. Your worship case study will be due on Sunday. What's Sunday's date? The 8th. Lord, no. Yeah, it is the 18th. It's the 18th. Where did July go? Okay, let me pause before I do anything else. Any questions? Make sure I'm not confusing anybody. And I can answer those.
Do you have an example of how this is done?
Okay, well, good question. So you have 2 pages, right? So what I simply want you to do is make sure that you compare and contrast. So you could do like I gave you earlier. So maybe your first page is the comparison. You can tell what is similar, in that wedding or Christian wedding and your other religion that you're talking about. And then you can tell what is different, maybe on your second page. So if you want to break it down, Elena, and say, here are the similarities, here is what is similar, and in your next paragraph or in your next page, here's what's different. Here's the contrast. That could work. Okay, you guys okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. Thank you. That's a good question. Good question. Okay. I think you're going to enjoy that. And we find many times that sometimes we have differences, but many times those differences, once you look at it, I'm not going to tell you, because you're going to see some really interesting things when you start to research those 2 different types of worship practices in different religions. So I think it'll be really interesting for you. All right. Let me go back to our class real quick. I'm going to switch before we get to our lesson. I feel like I'm not gonna see y'all. All right, I'm coming back to you. I'm gonna share my screen. And let me know when you can see it. All right, you should be seeing the home screen again. All right, y'all, look at this. We're in week 7, so we're right here. And then here's week 8 and here's week 9. I just want to briefly talk about these. All right, so next week, we're going to focus a little bit more on the ring shout. There's going to be a discussion post next week. And this talks about worship practices that we received from African ancestors. And so let me see if I can click on this real quick. Yeah, I'm not going to go into it too much today because there's going to be a video that you're going to watch next week. I think you're really, really going to get a kick out of that because the ring shout was a practice that our slave ancestors did in worship. And there are some similarities that you may still see in Black church worship today. So I don't want to give it all away. I hope it's going to be really interesting for you. And lastly, on week 9, so we're wrapping up on week 9. Your research paper is what you're going to work on week 9. So I want you to see that. I'm still making some changes to it. I did have a particular topic on here of history of Christian marriage, but let's just talk about it. We're going to compare and contrast slaves' practices of weddings and the history of Christian marriage. So you're going to look at chapter 5 in Costin for this paper, chapter 5 in Melva Costin, okay? And the history of Christian marriage, that's going to be chapter 5 in Susan White. That's interesting, they're both chapter 5. But in your paper, it's going to be really interesting. You're going to give, it's interesting, like we kind of focused on marriage, but interesting how you're going to give a background to Christian marriage, how it was carried out in the biblical times, but you're also going to share those issues and historical practices of how slaves were married, how they were united in marriage, and that's a part of Christian worship. So I think you're going to really get a good kick out of that as well. And last part to that, make sure that's at least 3 pages. Some of you have already started. Make sure that you use MLA citations, okay, and a works cited page. And you can also, at the end of that paper, discuss any implications that you see from the slave marriages today or Christian marriages today. So for example, I was out of town and we went to a wedding in Maryland, and I'm sure this is not nothing special, but you may have been to weddings as well where they jump the broom. You ever seen Black couples and they jump the broom? So that was something, now I'm not going to give it all away, but you'll see it in chapter 5 of Costin. That was something that slaves marriages did entail. So that's something that right there. That's
It's supposed.
Go
Can
ahead.
I add? He's supposed to sweep away all the badness from the past to begin anew or something like that.
Yeah. And so you're very good. And so our slave ancestors had a lot of beliefs. There were reasons. I'm gonna just put it like that. There were a lot of reasons behind what they did. Nothing was done just as happenstance, you know? All right. All right, everybody. So we're going to pause right there. And I know that was a lot. Let me switch to our lesson. Do you all have any questions for me? While I'm queuing up, if anybody is continuing with us next semester in the fall, I'm not going anywhere. I'm still going to be with you. So make sure that you do your registration, okay? We got to have y'all registered. And also, if you know anybody, we're always recruiting for our religious studies certificate program. And so you're going to see some information rolling out, hopefully within the next week or so. We're trying to do some more promotion. Okay. All right. Let me know if you can see my PowerPoint. It says African spirituality.
Yes.
All right. Okay, everybody, we're going to talk about just that. And I love this picture. Y'all know I like art. And I want you to see this picture to the right. I'm going to turn my light off real quick. Look at that picture of Africa. I hope y'all can still see me. Sometimes these lights overhead give me a headache. And I love this picture of Africa. I love this, the stars, and it's like the sun is behind it. Yes, it gives so much relevance to the power of Africa. So I love
Why
that.
you say that? Why do you say that?
Say it
Why?
again.
I mean, why?
I'm sorry, I apologize. I didn't hear what you said.
Why do you say that?
The picture?
Yes.
Okay, I was just saying that I love this picture because it gives so much strength and positivity to the continent of Africa. If you look at the stars, stars are celestial beings. You look at the sun, the sun gives us light, the sun gives power, the sun gives resource, right? And it's behind Mother Africa. And I just love the image that this picture shows to people. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the connotation that people had of Africa in just the next slide or so. But I think this picture just really says it all. Okay.
Connotation, do you mean stereotypes?
That's right.
Okay.
Yep. All right. So let's get into our discussion today. Our session won't be too long, but and I want to show you a document at the end of our session. I thought it was really important for us, if we're going to talk about Christian worship, that we go back to origins, that we kind of understand, especially us being African American.
Go back to the motherland.
Yes, ma'am. That we understand where African American practices came from. So let's talk about the whole issue of survival. African spirituality is what we're discussing today, and African spirituality helped the African people in this America, right, North or South America or wherever they went to, but it really helped them to just survive. It helped them to survive. Here's a word that an acronym really, ATR. ATR. If you see that in Melba Costin's readings, in this week's reading in chapter 2, ATR means African traditional religions. African traditional religions. And our African ancestors believed that there was already this universe that existed, and this universe was sacred. I think we mentioned this before, that our African slave ancestors already had a religious basis to them. They already believed in God. Maybe they didn't call God G-O-D, but they believed in God. Maybe it was a different word for them. Our slave ancestors then came to their new home and built on what they already had practiced. So they already had an internal belief of, yeah, we didn't get here by ourselves. There's a creator that's behind it. All right, so when we talk about Christian worship, or worship now in this second part of our class in the Black church, We have to talk about communication, and we have to talk about what messages did for the African ancestors. So if you look on this slide, there for the African ancestors, there was always this blending of music and movement, whether it was a drum or whether it was an instrument, but there was always a blend of music and movement. Now let's get to this point that I have here that I was talking to you about on the previous slide about that picture. Africa has such a rich history, of rich resources, rich people, right? But the continent was always described by the invaders, by the people who were not living there, to be a lost continent, that it was dark, that the people there were ignorant, right? And so we have to be careful, especially as African American people, we have to be careful that we do not play into that, as Ms. Smith was saying earlier, like that stereotypical thought that we know it wasn't lost and it wasn't dark and they were not ignorant. They were wise and holy and revering. All right. So the new slaves that came to, so the slaves that came to this new world, this America, they found the Word of God to be liberating for them. They found it to help them to respond to the oppression that they were going through. So whether it was a song, whether it was a preached word, whether it was gathering with other people, that was a way for them to cope or continue to survive. And I just put this picture of this lady dancing. I just found this picture, but it just reminds me of music and movement. And that's one of the key things that is very familiar with African religious traditions. All right. So Melva Costin, in her book in chapter 2, talks about how these African communities started to formalized in terms of worship in colonial America. A lot of slaves were, like we said, they already had a religion. They already had their own African spirituality. And then, so now let's talk about baptism. And so now they were being baptized into Christianity in America to usher them into this new thing. But you had to remember that they already knew of this. It may not have been in the words of what we had in English, but they already knew of this. But here was something that was really tragic or sad in my eyes. The slaves were given unfamiliar names. So they were, when they were going through this baptism, they had an African name, right? And then they were given another name that was more English, that was more Caucasian sounding. So for example, there's a story in your book, in Melva Costin's book in chapter 2, that talks about Anthony and Isabella. They were two slaves that were baptized. I want to say it was in Jamestown, Virginia. And they were given, now they were not born Anthony and Isabella in Africa, but they were given these names by their slave holders. And they were then baptized into Christianity and were supposed to hold those names as their, new identity. Now, as we talk about worship here, let's just pause and have a little bit of conversation. Many times when slaves and their white slave holders would worship, it didn't go down always without a hitch. It was not always a happy situation. There was a lot of separation in the church. There were places where Africans could sit, or our enslaved ancestors could sit apart from their slaveholder, right? And they were often denied communion. We remember we talked about that. They were often denied that.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's.
There's a scene like that in Goodbye Uncle Tom.
Oh, I didn't see that. Tell me what happened.
I don't remember one percent, but I know what happened. There was the slaves were like around in this
Wow.
cage thing, fence or whatever from their enslavers, and they gave them the wine to drink and fed them the bread of Christ inside the church.
Great.
The
Okay.
full movies on YouTube.
Okay. And it's called Uncle Tom.
Goodbye, Uncle Tom.
Goodbye,
Uncle Tom.
Uncle Tom. I always like good movies. Thank you, Miss Smith. Um, Anybody else want to jump in there? How do you think that our ancestors felt going to worship and being separated? Because worship was seen as a place where you could have some sense of freedom. How do you think they felt?
Their religion was their only salvation left.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't think they wanted to be there in the first place because the message that was coming to them was not one that they wanted to hear or could relate to, because it was not a message of hope. It was constantly, I think, a message fed
Oppression.
of what you cannot do, what you shouldn't do, or don't steal. I read in one of the paragraphs where it said, chapters, where it says, reminding them not to steal from the master. So it was not any inspiration or hope to the
Right.
service that they attended. They probably did not want to be there in the first place.
I'm sure. That's a good point. Um, this your only day off. Your feet hurt, your back hurt, your head hurt, and now we got to get up and come and listen to this when um, we know now in 2021, much of Christian worship at this time was, and I think that was Irene talking,
Yeah,
was manipulated. I think that's the best word I can use. It was
right.
manipulated, it was crafted to
To oppress them.
oppress them, right? Keep them in their place. So it
Right.
was, yeah, it wasn't like the churches, hey, that we have today that are going to encourage us to improve ourselves and to love on our families and to love the Lord with all our heart and to be a stellar person in our community. No.
No. They were teaching you how to stay in your place.
Stay in your place. Right. And so that's why, now this is not in the book, but this is just Professor Berry. That's why we have to be careful when people say, um, I've heard people say, well, it's the white man's religion. Well, you have to understand that our African ancestors already had God. They already knew God, and what they
Just
shared.
look at Ethiopia.
Yes. And at this time during
Can you hear me?
yes, ma'am. Hold on one second. I'm gonna come right back to you. But what the slaveholders shared with them during slave times, colonial America, was very much not the truth. It was twisted. It was bent. It was, I call it the Bible on a slant. So they
Right.
use they use scriptures to make themselves feel better about, keeping their slaves.
Right. I agree with that. Yeah, it's not what we know. And
That's not,
thank goodness they brought something with them. Can you imagine if they came with nothing, with nothing, spiritual or religious beliefs or whatever, if they had nothing?
That's a real good point. That's a good point. I can't imagine. 'Cause I can't imagine even going through that whole passage of being stripped from your land and you're being taken to some strange place and I don't know where I am. That's traumatic.
It is.
But to know that wherever I'm going, God is there, that
That's
could possibly give them some solace.
mhm.
Good. All right, so I want you to see that even in these African communities, in all of the colonies, we have this issue of, let me skip down here. We have this issue of baptism. Let me get right here and then I'm going to show you this document. Slave baptism. Let me know if you can see me and I changed the slide to slave baptism.
Yes.
I forgot to ask y'all. Okay. Now, I love this picture. Now, yeah, it probably is not a slave baptism. I just found it. But but their first recorded slave baptism was in 1641. That's not to say that they didn't occur before them, but it's the first recorded record that we have. And it was an African slave woman, not sure of her name, but she was baptized in Dorchester, Massachusetts. It was really, really interesting. Now, this whole issue of baptism, so let me go back a little bit. The issue of baptism is that the person wants to experience new life in Christ, that they're a new person, that they've taken on this new faith, right? Now, in our day, and I know we may belong to different churches, they're different things, Methodists may do things a little bit different, Baptists may do different, but it's the whole premise is the same, new life in Christ. Now, back in slavery time, think about it. These actions were not necessarily, so if a person was baptized, if a slave, should I say, was baptized, it wasn't always because the slaveholder was concerned about that slave's salvation or their life, or they were concerned about their faith. Many times, y'all, it had economic reasons associated with it. And so there were some churches in the 16th and 17th century that did baptize and admit slaves to be members. But over time, it became not necessarily we're so concerned about you joining the church and accepting the Lord, but it was ways to, what's the word, y'all? Control them. So you can see this word called Durante Vita. Durante Vita. And it's in 1664, these were laws that relegated African slaves to a perpetual bondage. So Durante Vita laws would say, if you're going to be baptized, right? And I left my book, no, let me see if I have it in here. In my reading, there was a passage that was read to the slave, because many times, of course, they couldn't read, but there was a passage that was read to the slave under Durante Vita that would say, you understand, you're being baptized, but this baptism does not make you free. And when I say free, not free in terms of a citizen. So they wanted the baptized slave to know that you're not, you might be accepting Christ and freedom in Christ, but you're not going to get freedom in America. Isn't that awful? So slaves had to,
Yes.
yeah, isn't it tacky? So slaves had to understand that even though they agreed to go through the baptism, that this baptism did not also mean perpetual freedom, real freedom. Okay. I hate to say it, but it was more so like an action that was done. It may have had more internal reason for the slave, but to the slaveholders, it was probably more so of a numbers game and also another way to keep them controlled. All right, so I'm gonna pull up,
Excuse me.
yeah.
Could you elaborate on what more about what you mean by it was a numbers game? How did that be positive if slaves were getting baptized?
Exactly. So for these white slaveholders, now in this area, it's not to say that it wasn't done in the South, because it was as well. So it would look, what's the best word for me to say? I don't know why these slaveholders always did what they did, but sometimes it would look advantageous, right? And I'm holding up air quotes. It would look nice that they had baptized slaves, that they had slaves that were, I don't want to use the word docile, but Christian, right? So that looked good on paper. I'm not sure if you guys are like history buffs, but my husband likes to look through these old records. Like if you've seen those old records, like on Ancestry.com, and these slaveholders had the list of their slaveholders, how old they were, and all of that stuff. And perhaps also in those records, it was records of, how many were baptized, how many did they take to church with them. That looked good for them. That looked good for their ego, I guess. But for the slave, or the slave family, they wanted the slave to know that even though you're coming to church and even though you've been baptized, please don't associate this freedom in Christ with freedom in the world, because you're still our quote unquote property. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes hypocritical sense.
Yeah,
Yes,
I
it
agree.
does.
It does make sense to us,
Mm-hmm.
because
I wonder if they did it also because it made them look as if they were treating their slaves fairly or with some
Right.
dignity or respect,
Better.
which gave them standing in the community. We
That's
gave
all it was.
slave, huh?
That's all it was. It
They
made
want
them
to make themselves look good.
Uh-huh.
make themselves look good,
Right.
right?
Okay. I don't see how it would make them.
Well,
Yeah,
to the others.
I'm processing it. I don't see how getting them baptized when you all know it does not mean that they're free or going toward freedom or that they are going to be because we weren't a docile people. Come on now. We were not docile. No,
right.
no,
No.
no.
Um,
So I don't see I just have to process it a little more.
sure. And I think all of us, let me read you this. I have my book on Kindle, so I apologize. I don't know what page this is. I have like a location. Let me see. I think it's page 20. Page 20 in Dr. Costin's book. And it talks about a missionary, Francis LaJaw, a missionary in Goose Creek, South Carolina. And actually, this is not too far from where my dad grew up in South Carolina. Provided the following declaration to which adult slave candidates for baptism were required to assent or subject themselves before they were baptized. Now, this is what they had to understand. Now, listen, y'all. Hey, now listen, if you're a slave, you also may not have the best education to understand all of this stuff. All right. So this is what they had to listen to. You declare in the presence of God and before this congregation that you do not ask for the holy baptism out of any desire, out of any design to free yourself from the duty and obedience that you owe to your master while you live, but merely for the good of your soul, and to partake of the graces and blessings promised to the members of the Church of Jesus Christ. And that was on page 20 of Dr. Costin's book. So it's interesting that they got this religious experience, right? In a worship experience, but there was still some quote unquote limitation on it. Okay, so today we're going to end up, and I'm going to, don't get scared if you can't see all this. I'm going to pull up the actual document that looks much better. In Dr. Costin's book, she also talks about this awesome situation in Massachusetts. And let me make sure I have the book. So there were some African servants in Massachusetts in 1638. And as we're talking about Christian marriages and membership, so they said, well, we want to get married, you know, and we want to join the church. And in 1693, a group of slaves started to form their own kind of group, and we'll call it like a religious meeting group. And I just found this to be so awesome, and I'm going to pull up the document on the screen. They formulated a first rule book for worship, and it's called Rules for the Society of Negroes, and it was written in 1693. So I want you to see, I'm going to pull it up so we can read it, but in this PowerPoint that you all have for yourself, you can click on this little link. So I'm going to pull it up and we're going to be able to see it a little bit better on the screen, because I know you can't see that little paper right there. So hold on. All right, so let's look at this. I'm going to pull up the link so we can see it for real. All right. Okay, now I'm coming back to you and let's see if we can see this. Good day, everybody that joined us. All right, somebody tell me if you can see Rules for the Society of Negroes on the screen.
Yes.
We can.
Super. Y'all, this just blew me away. Look how awesome our ancestors are. This is 1693. And so in terms of worship, so we're talking about worship. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. Okay. And I won't read everything word for word, but you all can kind of read a little bit to yourselves. Look at how it starts. As I was reading this last night, I was really just at a loss for words. It says, we, the miserable children of Adam and of Noah. I just had to stop right there. Thankfully admiring and accepting the free grace of God that offers to save us from our miseries. Let's just stop. That just kind of tells you what they were going through. And of course, we'll never know the whole story 100%, but wow.
Because those slaves were illiterate.
Yes, yes. Some. Now this one was written in northern colonies in Massachusetts. So some, not all, but you are right, could read. Some could read, not all.
But if they were found out they could read, they would get killed off.
Yeah.
Some were hidden. Some came over here literate, not necessarily in English, but in other languages.
That's good.
So it wouldn't be surprising that eventually we were able to do this because we just hid it.
Yes. That's a good one. All right.
Yeah.
Mhm. Okay, so I'm going to skip down a little bit, and that we may be assisted in the service of our Heavenly Master. We now join together in a society wherein the following rules are be observed. Now, I just found this to be awesome. This is 1693, y'all. And excuse me, some of the early ancestors that were brought over from Africa. I mean, this just, it speaks so much volumes to me, and it gives us all so much, what's the word? Gratitude of how they came together and they formed these societies, they formed these groups, they formed these, later on in the next chapters, churches. Okay, all right, so anyway, I won't read everything here, but I want you to just kind of peruse over this document. So they have rules on when they're going to meet. When they're going to meet. Look at that first bullet point, Roman numeral 1.
Because if they don't tell Massa when and where they will meet, Massa will punish them severely.
The meeting in the evening after the Sabbath.
Yeah, they meet between the hours of 7 and 9.
Uh-huh.
7 and 9.
After they have gone to church with the master on Sunday.
Exactly.
In the evening after the Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
What would that? Yeah. Or would it be the day after the Sabbath or after the Sabbath meeting? So it could, yeah. I was thinking Monday, but I think you're right.
Monday. That's what I'm thinking, Monday. Day after the Sabbath.
It said
Evening
meet
after
in the evening after the Sabbath, so it could be two different ways.
Yeah.
I read it Sunday between 7 and 9.
Between
But
7
it
and 9.
could be Monday between 7 and 9.
So Sabbath could mean the time, the day that they actually worship.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It could be.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
yeah. And the evening, just like you said, it would be after they've already worshipped with the master. So
With the master.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I think that would be more realistic because you know what? The Monday would have been a work day.
Yep, and I'm too
That's
tired.
yeah. You're right.
And you know, in our society and what we know today, we get off at a certain time. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if they got off at a certain time. They just probably had to work until it was just done. I don't know. But
Sunday after they already went to church, well, whatever. It would have been Sunday after they've already done service based upon what the master wanted to do, because that's the only time that they really were, from my knowledge, given to be off.
To be off.
Yeah, unless it was late in the evening during the week. Late in the evening. But they had to get up so early. I don't know if they would be able to
You get off, get out.
get out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point.
You might be right. That could be right.
Uh-huh.
Sense.
Okay, stay in Roman numeral 1. So
Well,
what
wait a
happened?
minute. They met between the hours of 7 and 9.
7 and 9.
Begin and conclude between the hours of 7 and 9. Look under the second bullet point. Oh no, that's under number 2, Roman number 2.
Yeah, that's what it says. Between the hours of 7 and 9, that may not be unseasonably absent from the families whereto we pertain, and I'm assuming that's the slave owner.
Right. You're right.
So Sunday night, 7 to 9, Sunday is sort of like your off day, except for you got to do this, this, and this. 7 to 9 is the time that you know you would be available to do it.
And look at, okay, so let's go down to Roman numeral 2. That's real good. Look at that second part of that sentence, and we will be careful that our meeting may begin and conclude between the hours of 7 and 9.
Right.
So they press for time. That we gotta get get all of this done.
So that we won't be missed or miss out.
Yep. unseasonably absent.
Right.
Mhm.
That's good. Let's
I
go back.
know we come from some really brilliant, intelligent people that knew what's what, just didn't have control over their bodies
That's right.
at this point in time. But we came from some brilliant people.
Yes, we did.
That's- Knew how to survive.
And this was a way for them to survive. You're right. Let's go back to Roman numeral 1 real quick. I see we're short on time. What happened during the meetings?
Prayers.
Prayer.
A white overseer looks, watches.
Mhm.
They had two prayers, a psalm will be sung, and a sermon repeated.
Sermon.
In the bullet one, that's what it says.
Right.
Between
They put
two prayers, a psalm shall be sung, and a sermon repeated.
Mm-hmm.
So sermon repeated probably means that there was a person who was the minister or whatever, and may have repeated what they heard in church with the with the slaveholder. Perhaps. Now, I'm not saying I'm 100% on this. Perhaps that sermon was reiterated, or there was a piece taken from that sermon that they wanted to, what's the word, make their own in their own meeting.
Yeah, let's emphasize that point.
I can easily see a preacher preaching about not stealing from our master,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, is not stealing if something fell on the floor.
Yeah.
So there's other ways to get the message or get what you need. There's other ways to do things.
Yes. Yes. That's good.
I have a comment.
Yes.
What happens in those meetings? A white overseer would watch over them. There's a scene like that in Goodbye Uncle Tom. That there's a slave mistress or slave overseer lady. She's watching over the slaves worshiping while they worship. I mean, so because if the white person or enslaver is around, um, it's like the slaves will plan to revolt or run away.
Sure. And look, we are that's a good point. We know that much of what our enslaved ancestors did was watched. Why was it watched? Because it was feared, it was unknown. They didn't know what they were doing. There's power in worship. There's power in gathering. And so that I'm sure. Thank you, Ms. Smith. Gave the others a lot of uncomfortable feelings. Okay, all right, I see we're at 156, but I just wanted you to just look at this document. Roman numeral 5 says, if any of our number fall into the sin of drunkenness or swearing or cursing or lying, here go that stealing again, or stealing, or notorious disobedience or unfaithfulness unto their masters, we will admonish him of his miscarriage and forbid his coming to the meeting. That's interesting.
How do you stop a slave from fornication when they're forced to have sex to produce other slaves?
Say it again, Ramona.
I was looking at 6. How do you stop a slave from fornication when they're many times were forced to have sex so they could produce other slaves? As it became so that as things changed and you could no longer import slaves, that's they slave masters lowered themselves to do. Force young slaves to produce more slaves. So how do you?
Yeah. And you know, it's one of the things you just have to, oh Lord, you shake your head. Every plantation, every house kind of did what they wanted to do. And that's the sad part that our enslaved ancestors had to deal with. Okay, but I just wanted to show you all this society list of rules that our ancestors came together in worship and said we found it advantageous that we get together in some type of meeting. And so remember, this is 1693 that Rules for Society of Negroes was established. And so you'll see more of those start to come as the years go by. I mean, that was just the late 1600s. So you still had the 1700s where you start to see more churches, African American churches, come into existence. And so that really gave a big foundation for what was expected in gathering. All right, everybody. I hope that was good for you. We're at 1:58. Any questions, comments?
No.
Okay. All right. So just a few reminders. Remember what I want you to remember. Make sure you check out your case study assignment for this week. You can also check out your last paper. That will be due, I got to put your due date on that. That will be due, I want to say it's like August the 1st. So you have time. Today's the 14th of July. Okay. And then next week, remember we won't meet next Wednesday or the Wednesday after that because we only got 2 more weeks, and you'll get my recorded version. And I'm going to also upload some really cool video about the African. There's one you're already going to see in your discussion about the ring shout, but I'm going to put some other instructional videos on there for you so you can see and compare some of the practices that were done in African societies, okay? All right. Ruben.
Okay.
Is Ruben here? Thanks, Tamika. Ruben, can you talk? I wanted you to tell them about the Praise House before we go. He may be at work. Can you talk,
I
Ruben?
think he's at work.
Okay, we understand. Okay, keep your job. All right, so, but Ruben, I did tell the group about the Praise House that you toured this weekend, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that next week with the ring shout. That was something that they did in the Praise House. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. I feel like I'm saying bye, but we're not saying bye. So you're just going to see me on the video for the next 2 weeks. And of course, if you have any questions, something's not clear, just shoot me a email or make sure that you call or whatever you need. Okay.
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 All
Don't
right.
forget to watch Goodbye, Uncle Tom.
That's right. And everybody tune in. Goodbye, Uncle Tom. Probably get it on Netflix.
No, it's on YouTube only.
Okay.
Free.
I like free. It's called Goodbye, Uncle Tom. All right. Okay, everybody. Y'all take care.
Okay, you too.